This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon. On the last podcast, I had some tough love for the Republican voter in Michigan. I told you guys that continue watching conservatism wasn't going to get us here. You know, when people watch Fox News all day and eventually the TV says, would you like to continue watching? Yeah, that's not good enough. Life is a participatory sport and politics definitely is. So in 2026, we need a different mentality. You want to save your state from certain ruin? Ask not what your party can do for you. Ask what your role is in winning the future. Today, though, I have more words of encouragement. And I have the simple formula for winning the ultimate battle for 2026 in Michigan. And that formula is this: you must dominate your counterpart. I think back to November, I was part of the New York Post swing state team. It was our job in all 7 swing states to tell stories that the local media would miss or ignore even, and to scoop them. Because a lot of times when there was oppo out on a candidate, say for instance, which found that Alyssa Slotkin is a fake farmer, that she doesn't pay property taxes, that the first time she ever voted in Michigan was for herself in 2018. Notice how you didn't see any of those stories in the Detroit News or Free Press? You ever notice that? You had to read about them in New York. You had to read that Alyssa Slotkin filed for divorce in Washington, D.C. You had to read about that in the Michigan Enjoyer. So we told the untold stories, and it worked. Trump won 7 out of 7 swing states. And so if all journalism is politics, as I do argue, that applies to me too. And so what happened in November, the way I look at it from the media perspective, what happened in November is my propaganda went up against that put out by the Detroit News and the Free Press, and it won. These were the people telling you that Lafayette, Coney Island is the good one. Yeah, it's infested by rats. Don't listen to them. These were the people telling you that Kamala Harris was ahead in the polling when her own team never had her ahead in the polling. The good news is their journalism is not well read. A lot of it hides behind paywalls, and because there's so few subscribers, their work is seen by few people. Those who do read it, their journalism is not well regarded, except typically by other people who write fake news. But among the 10 million people of Michigan, it's clear the Enjoyer is becoming the loudest voice in the room. And so as we enter this ultimate battle of 2026, I commit to dominating my counterparts as we fight the information war. When they tell fake stories, I'll tell you how they're fake and exactly how. I'll pull out the protractor. We can spot the slant together. No weapon formed against the good people of Michigan will prosper. It won't work because we won't let it. My friend Patriot Post Girl can out-meme anybody on the left. I can't even think of who her competition would be at this point. Heather Dow at this point has reduced our governor, Gretchen Whitmer, to a brunette Barbie, and our would-be governor, Jocelyn Benson, to a punchline. She wakes up every day thinking about how she can dominate her counterpart. Justin Barclay? He's a more trusted voice than any news journalist in radio or TV in Michigan. They dab on makeup and they read scripts written by others. Justin speaks from his heart, and you love him for it. Justin wakes up every day early, reading his Bible, and prepared to dominate his counterpart. Anna Hoffman, on Twitter, you know her, shoes on please. She can see the thing behind the thing better than anybody. She can find the messaging angle better than any leftist can in Michigan. It's Anna's work that's helped convict the Michigan Ministry of Truth. She's shown them as little concerned with facts but obsessed with narratives. And so my old friends at the Detroit News, when I jab at them, they're quiet as church mice. But Anna really gets under their skin. When she speaks, they lash out in anger and make even bigger mistakes. Anna is a master of the persuasive arts. She dominates her counterparts on a daily basis. That's what it's going to take. All of us using whatever gift we have to save our state. And as I did say last episode, that's going to take an attitude adjustment. And so listen closely as I say this. Don't make Donald Trump the enemy of the good. Look, I get it. You want the Donald Trump of Michigan to run for governor. But there isn't one. Donald Trump is a once-in-a-lifetime figure. We should feel honored to watch him work. There's nobody else in American history who Babe Ruth their shot for 35 years, then won the presidency, then had it stolen from him, got sued, got convicted, got shot, and won it back. Donald Trump is a singular figure, and it's an insult to his singularity to expect that there's just some Donald Trump, running around on ATVs in Michigan who we just somehow haven't heard of. What makes him Donald Trump is that you've been hearing about him for the last 45 years. And so as we go into 2026, don't make Trump the enemy of the good men and the good women who will enter the governor's race. The fact is, Donald Trump is not on the ballot in 2026 and never will be again. So there's no Trump to vote for. There's only the future of your family and your state and yourself. Don't let your want for the next Donald Trump become your excuse to not work hard enough to save our state. Kanye West actually said this best. We won't all be American Idol, but you can at least grab a camera, shoot a viral. And so, guys, look, I'm in contact with the Republican voter all the time. I've heard all of your reasons why not. And honestly, I'm sick of hearing them. You sound sick when I listen to you. You sound sick of saying them. So how about we all just stop? How about we all stop looking to be entertained and start asking, how can I help? How can I be of service? Michigan can be saved, but only if we get off the couch and work together. Whoever told you we can't vote our way out of this, yeah, they were lying. Let's try something different. Let's try our hardest. My guest today is Ryan Kelley. He's a familiar name in Republican circles in Michigan. You probably remember a few years ago when Kelley was a candidate in the Republican primary for governor. You probably remember that on the eve of that primary, FBI agents arrested Kelley for his role in the January 6th protests in Washington. So let's think back to 2022. What happened that year? By the time of the primary, the top of the Republican ticket, Detroit Police Chief James Craig, former Detroit Police Chief James Craig, polls actually showed him beating Whitmer had he made the ballot, but he didn't make the ballot. He got caught up in a signature forgery scam. Then on the eve of the primary, FBI interference removes Kelley as a viable option too. We all remember what happened next. Tudor Dixon won the primary, then she got caught in a blue wave. The Republican field did not unite around her, and with abortion on the ballot, she stood no chance. So we all get 2022 was a bad year, but what you need to get now is that was 3 years ago. By the time we vote again, it'll be 4 years ago. And so we have to view the future and even the candidates from the past with fresh eyes, as this is a new day. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us on the Enjoyer podcast.
James, it is a pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks for having me on. Beautiful day in Michigan.
It is. It's morning again in Michigan.
Yeah.
We'll start you here, Ryan. What do you enjoy about Michigan?
I enjoy all of our Great Lakes. I enjoy the summers here a little bit more than I enjoy the winters, but I think that's probably most of us around the state. But it is a beautiful state. There's so much as far as natural resources. There's a lot of really great people here. In 2022, when I ran for governor, I met so many of those great people. And even though I didn't win the primary, those friendships have endured. And so it's been a huge blessing. I love our state.
Absolutely. As of right now, you're exploring a run for governor. Ryan, why not just outright run for office?
Great question, James. And there's a lot of things that we could peel back and unfold right there. There's a lot to consider because, as you just mentioned a minute ago, 2026 is not 2022. There's a different field. is very interesting if you look at the entire ticket too, because every seat is open. Senator Gary
Yes, especially with
Peters,
the Gary
yeah,
Peters announcement.
you
Yeah.
got it. So that opens up a Senate seat. There's congressional races all across the state. Both chambers in the Michigan legislature, the House and the Senate, are going to be open for grabs. Secretary of State, Attorney General, and the governorship. There's a lot for us to consider, and we have to have a candidate. James, you're mentioning a lot of really great things here as I listen to you. We have to have a candidate not that can replicate Trump and the fact of
Mm,
being Trump, but can replicate the excitement behind a candidate that people want to
mm,
get out and vote for. That is
yeah.
critical that we have somebody in our state that is able to inspire and really ignite the state behind a movement and not just the same old boring talking points with no results that we've seen for many, many of years.
So as you enter this exploratory process, what answer are you looking for? What would make you think I should not do this?
That's a great question. I have many talking points on both sides. The why should I do it? Why should I not do it? There's a lot of conversations that I have to have with my family as well. As you know, James, I'm a husband. I love my wife. I really enjoy spending, my time and my life with her, being a parent. And I have 6 kids as well. There's a lot to consider there. Family comes second to God. So first of all, it has to be a calling in that direction. And that's a difficult thing to
Yeah.
discern exactly what that looks like. Have my family on board with me. And I can tell you, since I put out the Kelley Blueprint for Michigan, it went viral on Twitter, which is now X. It went viral on TikTok. I guess it's all over Facebook and Telegram. I don't even use those platforms anymore because I was booted off of them. And the response has been extremely supportive. There's been so many people that have reached out, offered help, want to get involved. But we really need to be strategic about this. We need to play the game of chess and not just the game of emotions and diving in and starting to say things.
Right.
Look at Jocelyn Benson's announcement, for example. Talk about an absolute train wreck. We can't have that on the Republican side. We must be strategic, we must be intentional, and we must play to win.
Mm. So why are you exploring a run? I think about 2022, right? We You had to have seen something that made you say, "What the hell's going on in Michigan?" And maybe my voice could be a voice of reason. Every podcast, just about, I harp on. And I focus on the importance of this 2026 election. But it really helps when people hear someone else say it. So, as someone else who also loves our state, what do you see when you look at that landscape? You see those 165 seats open. What makes you think that this is even worth exploring?
Because Michigan's a state that's worth investing in. It's worth growing. It's worth utilizing to the fullest of its potential. Our schools are failing. We're producing subpar students. Businesses are choosing other states over our state. Families are choosing to go elsewhere. Students that graduate choose to go elsewhere. Michigan should be a place that's the exact opposite of those things. Michigan should be a place
Mm,
where we have elected officials that say, how do we get the government out of the way as much as possible so people want to come
right.
to Michigan? How do we, instead of investing in an obviously failed education system, how do we change things around so that there's an opportunity for students to excel so that they want to not only, when they excel in school, stick around in the state of Michigan to A, have families, B, start companies, find jobs, and want to make a life here in the state of Michigan. It's things like that, James, that really make me say, okay, we have so much good here. Why are we doing so much bad and pushing away from the things that we could be with the state of Michigan, really putting front and center, not only at the state level, but the national level as well?
Yeah. On the education piece, Michigan's always been a different kind of state. Detroit was the one city that runs on brawn rather than brains. And so people would work with their hands. I was blessed to go to West Bloomfield High School, graduated 2002. Definitely an A plus district at the time. But I can't ever say that Michigan has been an especially smart state or especially focused on education. It just doesn't ever seem to be where we excel. So we're talking about a lifelong dynamic. I'm 40. We've never been especially smart. I don't really see that as something that could happen. What do you think could be done to result in better outcomes for the 1.5 million kids of Michigan?
Back in 2000, if we remember back that far, there was the ballot initiative to
Yes.
allow the dollars to follow the student. And that failed. That did not
Mm-hmm.
pass. And so we've continued to perpetuate this pouring of dollars into the public school system that's ran by the teachers unions that continue
Mm-hmm.
to grow the administrative state. We invest so much money per pupil in the state of Michigan, and so many of those dollars, as you know, James, goes towards the administrative side of things versus actually providing value to the student. 25 years ago, when that ballot initiative was on the 2000 election, it was a different time in the state of Michigan. There's availability to a lot more information now. There's, like you mentioned earlier in your podcast, people pushing away from the mainstream media and finding people like yourself as the actual sources of
Mm.
media where they can get reliable, accurate information. And I think it's becoming more and more obvious with homeschool growing in the state of Michigan, people seeing what the results are and having access to that information, whether by ballot initiative or whether it's an act of the legislature. I think we really need to
Mm-hmm.
take a look, a good, strong look at what it would look like to have the dollars follow the student, allow for that school of choice, and create competition inside the schooling system. If you're not providing the type of service, really, right? Education is a service. If you're not
Mm.
providing a service that people say, I want to send my children there, they will look to other places and say, my child will get a better education over there. I want to put my dollars to work in that sector versus the failing public sector we have now.
And I hope people who just heard what Ryan said understand what it means. What a typical Republican might do is say, well, we're just going to run the Department of Education better. We're just going to do everything better. We're going to run the public schools better. What Ryan is saying is you need to liberate people from this neighborhood school model. There is no reason to think, maybe there was a century ago, but there's no reason to think well into the 21st century that the school nearest you is the school you have to go to and that the tax money that you pay needs to go into that school. Why shouldn't it go to you? Why shouldn't it stay with you? I mean, I was a product of school choice. If we did not have school choice in Michigan, I would have gone to Mumford High School in Detroit rather than West Bloomfield High School. I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have gotten into Michigan. I wouldn't have done so many cool things because of where we lived at the time. Nothing to do with ability, merit, anything like that. So, but yeah, I mean, so reading between the lines, it sounds like I was going to ask you about what kind of ballot initiative might pair well with a governor's race. It sounds like you're saying it might make sense to run it back on that vouchers issue that was voted down in 2000.
It would make a lot of sense. I think that people would be
Mm,
enthusiastic along with constitutional carry. Let's get rid of these CPL
right.
laws and put constitutional carry in place. So I know those are two separate topics right there, but those are both really good ballot initiatives that would inspire people to want to get to the polls. And if you have a candidate that people are fired up, that can bring a lot of other change in the aspect of different policies and cutting regulations. One of the things I suggested was the Michigan Department of Government Efficiency, MI-DOE. What they're doing at the federal level, start to implement those
Right.
at the state level, where you come in, you get a group of individuals that are laser focused on identifying different spots throughout regulations, through the bureaucratic paperwork that we have, levels and levels of red tape, and eliminating all of those, drastically reducing the size and scope and reach of government to make it so it's easier in the state of Michigan to do business and to live. You know, there's not many instances, and none that I can think of off the top of my head, where government is looking out for the best interest of people. They're not.
Talk about the constitutional carry piece because I find that to be so fascinating. Michigan is we love our guns, and we love to hunt, and we love to fire guns and own guns and that kind of thing. And yet we also have a legal system where if you don't have permission from your government, say you get pulled over and you have a pistol in your car, that's considered carrying a concealed weapon, and that could be 2 years felony firearm charge, big trouble. Um, then I hear from the conservative side. I floated this. Hey, why not constitutional carry? It would get a lot of Republicans to vote. Gun people are organized. Gun people have money, and gun people fill out a hell of a lot of paperwork. So it just makes sense to embrace them as a natural ally. And then I hear from the conservatives who say, well, it's our natural right. It's in the U.S. Constitution. Why would we need it in the Michigan Constitution? So please explain your interest in constitutional carry and why we need it, even though we already have a Second Amendment nationally.
It's a great question. Second Amendment nationally says that people have the right to keep and bear arms. The Constitution in the state of Michigan says that you have the right to self-defense and the right to keep and bear arms. So there is a little bit of a differentiation there in the language, right? The U.S. Constitution being the well-regulated militia, and then the right to keep and bear arms. Michigan Constitution says that you have the right to self-defense. So, James, I ask you, if you have the right to self-defense, then why do you have to go through all of these special trainings, which training is good? Let me make a preface there. People should absolutely get training on firearms. But why do you need government permission in order to exercise one of the rights that's guaranteed by the Constitution at the state and the federal level? So it was Governor Engler that initially signed all the CPL laws. Rick Schneider updated some of the CPL laws that we have here as well. And really, the CPL laws, while some can maybe say, oh, there's good intention there to get people to go through training, right? Sorry, that's a null and void argument, because that's not what it says. It says it's a right to self-defense and a right to keep and bear arms. I do think that training is important. Let me preface that again. Training is very important when it comes to firearms, when it comes to self-defense, and there is an abundance of classes from, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, for example, different types of martial arts. You have gun ranges in many places across the state, and you should train and you should learn how to protect yourself. But you shouldn't have to have government permission in order to do those things. Now, let me add to this too as well, James. We have a weak criminal justice system in the state of Michigan when it comes to enforcing those gun laws. What if the penalties for using firearms or other weapons was much more severe? It's already illegal to shoot someone, for example, yet people still do it, right? So you can't make a law that makes it illegaler to shoot people. It doesn't work that way. What you need to do is enforce the laws to make it so it's a deterrent for people to think, you know what, maybe I shouldn't be using this firearm for fill in the blank. That's a crime, taking away somebody else's rights or stealing their property or their life, etc.
And it's an interesting story, because in Michigan, I looked this up several years ago, and I'm sure it's largely still true at this point. But basically, when I looked it up, so we have 83 counties in Michigan, and in the year I was looking up, 64 of them had not had a single gun homicide the previous year. And so the gun means something very different to a lot of people in Michigan than it might mean in the Metro Detroit context. And so the fear of the news, the there should be a law mentality, that all led us to treat every gun as if it's used by a criminal in Detroit, when that's actually remarkably few of the people in Michigan who own guns or use guns.
Yeah, wild statistics, right? And, I think looking back at these laws being imposed on, gun owners that do follow the law, all the extra paperwork you're talking about, look at the red flag laws that we have now. You think criminals are finding safe storage spots for their guns, and so on and so forth. So yeah, your point's valid there. Most places there isn't any issues with guns, and the places that there is issues with guns, when you have these certain instances, it's usually people that aren't registered with them. It's people that are, breaking other laws as well. So there's other laws in place and they're not following those laws either as well. And again, going back to the Constitution, people should have the right to defend, or people do have the right to defend themselves. And there shouldn't be a bunch of obstacles in the way, especially nowadays when, the streets they're more dangerous than ever because of, politicians like what we have in Lansing right now, or what we see now over in Washtenaw County with their new sheriff over there, right? Very soft on crime when it should be the other way around. And then people would be deterred from using weapons for crimes.
Yeah. Ryan, the 2022 election, even more than 2020, to the Michigan voter, Republicans carry this psychic damage. Because you come in nationally, everyone's talking about a red wave. That doesn't materialize really at all. And then in Michigan, John James is really the only Republican who had a good night that night, somehow breaks through in a Democrat year and wins. As I look back at 2022, I get it. When you remove the top candidate from the ballot, and when it turns out what got him off the ballot was a signature collection scandal run by known Democrats and discovered by known Democrats, it looks like the man was set up to be taken off the ballot. Then you look at your FBI dropping in early in the morning one day and making sure that word goes out wide, making sure people see the image. And so that effectively takes you off the ballot. So I see, in a sense, a stolen election because Republicans in Michigan didn't get to vote for who they wanted for because of scams and scandals that kept them off the ballot. When you look back at 2022, we all need to turn the page on a horrible election year for Republicans. But in retrospect, what did happen? What's the story of the 2022 election?
I think a lot of us know the truth. It's kind of like the 2020 election, right? We know that there was a lot of foul play there. We know that it was pulling out from underneath of President Donald Trump, all the suspicious stuff that happened. And that continued to perpetuate into 2022. You're right. The 5 other gubernatorial candidates there that went through that signature collection company and then ultimately disqualified by Jocelyn Benson.
Mm-hmm.
They were all, Chief Craig was at that time the lead candidate. Perry Johnson had a lot of money that he was putting into the race too. And it would have been interesting to kind of see where that would have materialized. Nonetheless, they were pushed away. They tried running different, court cases to try to get things straightened out. That never materialized either. Moving on, not knowing how the field would start to shake out, myself becomes the most popular candidate across the state of Michigan. Very much a boots on the ground game, grassroots movement. I mean, James, I can't tell you the number of hours that I spent on the road in my truck, meetings from coast to coast, Upper Peninsula, all the way down to, Monroe County, all over the state, and really just growing a base that was obvious in the polls. And then here comes the FBI arresting me for misdemeanor trespassing.
I mean, who's ever heard of such a thing? The FBI making a house call for a misdemeanor.
Wild stuff, isn't it? And so, James, let me add this to you. There was helicopters flying around above my house. Came out in
almost
full force.
As if they knew.
Yeah. They wanted the show.
I mean, they were like you were Manuel Noriega or something.
They would think so. If you would have saw that from the sidelines, which my neighbors were watching. That's the other thing. They wanted to create that shock and awe in the neighborhood.
Man.
They wanted the headlines. They wanted to embarrass me. They wanted to embarrass my family. And
the Republican voter, they wanted everyone to send that article to their people saying, you were going to back that guy?
That's it.
That guy? Really?
They tried as much as they could with that whole narrative. And like you said earlier, right, they're not reporting news. They're creating narratives. They're trying to be misleading. Mm-hmm. They're trying to be deceptive. I still to this day, James, have had some people contact me and say, oh, I'm glad you're out of prison. And, what was your charge anyway? Like they still don't even know. So the seeds of doubt that the FBI was trying to plant, people weren't sure what was going to happen to me through that process. They knew that they wanted Whitmer out. They knew that much. and they weren't sure exactly what was going to happen to me. So those seeds of doubt that they planted worked for them. And then ultimately we ended up with a trifecta in Lansing for the Democrats, right? Because, similar to what you were talking about with Chief Craig, I got a screenshot here on my phone as well. When they paired up all of the remaining candidates against Whitmer, I was 41% to her 38%. That was relatively soon to when I was arrested as well. So I was the next viable candidate to take out Gretchen Whitmer in the general election. So they had to do something. So again, more election interference, more of Washington, D.C. interfering in Michigan elections so that they can try to create the narrative that they're looking at. And then ultimately, they put me in prison for 60 days for, trespassing, misdemeanor trespassing outside of the Capitol, nonviolent. But the judge says at my sentencing that I ran for public office. I misled my supporters about the 2020 election. I misled my supporters about January 6th, saying that the 2020 election was stolen. January 6th was not an insurrection. And he said, for those reasons, there needs to be a period of incarceration, 60 days in federal prison.
Man, for most people, 60 days in as a TV show, you lived it. You served time in prison. Then you got a pardon from Trump. And so if you do run after this exploring process, you'll probably wind up being the only candidate in the field who's been pardoned by a president. Has there been a shift in how this was perceived and your involvement in J6 was perceived 2022 when you get arrested versus today, all these years later?
I think there's a huge shift in how people think about January 6th. As much as you see the Democrats and the leftists beg and plead for the American people to please care about January 6th. Please make it an issue.
They don't.
People don't care.
They never did.
They don't. Yeah, you're right. And it's obvious in the results of the 2024 election in the 7 swing states, like you mentioned earlier, with Donald Trump. He dominated all of them. People didn't care about January 6th. And I think now that, yes, I'm pardoned. Yes, that's totally behind us. We have a new lens looking at 2026. If anything, it boosts me up substantially versus pulling me down.
I think about this George Orwell quote. It says, I wasn't made for a time like this. Was Smith, was Jones, were you? You come off as a very normal man. You're a neighbor. You work. You have a family, a beautiful family. What led such a normal man to January 6th? What was your January 6th story? How did the times drive you to that moment?
It's a great question. Before I get into that, you made a comment there. People like Trump because he's authentic. And I think that's why a lot of people liked me as well, because I am just a regular guy from West Michigan.
Right.
I have a real estate company. I do well, but I'm not a billionaire. And I just say it like it is. I look people in the eye and I say it like it is. And if I shake somebody's hand, that's what it is. And that's how I live my life. And that blended over into me running for office. And that is ultimately what led them to take all the actions they did to try to silence me, because they knew that a guy that was authentic, that people liked and could get behind. And I think that's the type of mentality, whether it's me or whether it's somebody else, the voters in Michigan to be excited about a candidate need somebody to say, that guy's authentic. That's the person that I want to get behind. And they just, if somebody's a BS or if somebody's authentic. But what led me to that? We all experienced, 5 years ago, what happened? They shut the country down, right? It was 5 years ago when all the talk of, COVID. And I think it was about 5 years ago, close to the day, when the first cases of COVID showed up in the United States. And it was soon after that we know the story. Everything was shut down, COVID-19 positive patients in nursing homes.
Fun fact, state of emergency in Michigan based on 2 presumptive positive cases.
Right.
2.
Yeah.
State of emergency.
Right. So was it all planned? I don't know. Fauci got a nice, good generalized pardon all the way back to 2014, right? No matter what you did, it's a free pass, nothing suspicious there, guys. So looking at that era, there was something about me and many others that said, something's not right here. And then as you see
Mm.
things go on, it was not only is something not right here, but this is a gross overreach of our government. Are you people really listening to what they're saying? Like, you're really going to follow this? And
Right.
it was early on, April of 2020 when I hosted protests of the Capitol in Lansing. We did several different protests around the state, basically saying, look, you can't lock us in our houses. You can't, tell us we're not allowed to make a living. You can't tell us we can't go to the store, right? Um,
Right.
there's nothing wrong with people being on the side of caution. Don't be a jerk. Don't go cough in people's faces. Don't be an idiot. You shouldn't then, now, or ever, right? Be respectful to
Right.
other people. But for a government to have that kind of overreach, I was one of those voices with many other that says, we're not doing this. And then as time went on,
Absolutely.
we saw the 2020 election. I was outside of the TCF Center hosting protests there on the eve of the election. After we saw the things that happened, 3 a.m. ballot drops, pizza boxes on the wall, et cetera, et cetera. You and all the folks out here know the story. And then ultimately, as time went on, that led to what happened in January 6th. And
Mm.
Trump invites us to Washington, D.C., come out here, support, the president, support fair elections. Let's get Congress to take a second look at everything that happened so that we provide unity to the country. Hey, we understand there's a big group of people that have a problem with what happened here. For the sake of national unity, let's take a closer look. But instead, it was a nah, screw you
Mm-hmm.
guys. We're going to do it our way. Joe Biden got 81 million votes. Okay, whatever. And,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, January 6th turned into a protest that, led to a narrative created by the left that was not accurate, wasn't an insurrection by any, sense of the word, right? And, at the same time, there were some people there that, did some things that they shouldn't have done. Don't beat up the building, but most people didn't beat up the building. I think there was a lot of feds that are the ones that started initiating that. And I saw with my own eyes too, James, before any of the chaos started, there was U.S. Capitol police officers that were firing into the crowd.
Mm.
Whether it was rubber bullets, the flashbangs, the smoke grenades. I watched all of that happen from the very start. And so where's the apology from them for what they did, right? Still waiting for that to happen. But that's really what led me to January 6th.
Oh, that's the thing. I mean, the whole, and so people say, oh, you shouldn't pardon the violent offenders. Here's why you should. Because when you fire into crowds, when you let that kind of a crowd into the building, they couldn't have gotten into the building on their own. There wasn't some master locksmith who let everybody in. They were waved in, they were let in.
Doors were
They
open.
could not have gotten in were they not let in. And so then you think about how many government sources were there, who were probably actually there to whip up the crowd. You can't very well do everything you can to incite a mob, then charge people for acting like a mob. The mob you got was the mob you created. And so this was government action. It was all the fruit of the tree of government action, letting people in the building, firing on them, getting them whipped up, and then you get the mob you want. This was a setup from day. It was not just some riot that happened to happen. It was set in motion to become exactly what it did. It was supposed to shock your conscience. It was supposed to remove Donald Trump from politics forever. And it was supposed to make you think, man, we really need a different type of Republican Party.
That's exactly right, James. They got what they were looking for. They wanted to get people to take certain actions and do certain things. They opened the door for folks because you're right. That wouldn't have happened if they didn't open the doors from the inside. It's exactly how it went down. And it was all set up to get Trump out of politics. Obviously, in the end, here we are. America's back on track again.
And you were talking about the April 2020 protests. That was supposed to be the precursor to January 6th, especially the one April 30th, where Michigan State Police let all those protesters in. What people don't get, because no one actually reads stories in Michigan, they just read headlines. FBI called Michigan State Police and said, let those guys with guns, let them into the Capitol. If you look at the pictures that day, people weren't even allowed to bring signs into the Capitol.
It's true.
You couldn't bring signs, but you could have a gun strapped across your chest. Why? To create the image that things were out of control, that it was all inspired by Trump's Liberate Michigan, that we needed a different kind of politics. And so had one of those guys unslung that gun from their chest and shot the place up, well, I guess that would have just been the cost of a headline then. People need to understand this stuff was done to you, not for you. And Ryan, and I think about another one. So mid-May, there's more protests in Lansing, and Whitmer says, hey, if you guys keep this up, there's going to be longer lockdowns. Then George Floyd dies, killed, overdoses, whatever, in Minneapolis. George Floyd dies, and then Whitmer is marching with Black Lives Matter protesters. So when it's free people wanting to be free, continued protests could affect your freedom negatively. I'll turn this car around. I'll turn this lockdown around and extend it. But when it was George Floyd, the governor marches with them. Obviously, staying home and staying safe from a virus was not a consistent message. Talk about the difference between how you and the January 6ers were treated versus the George Floyd protesters.
Just in sheer dollar amounts of damage that was done, not only are we not in the same ballpark, we're not in the same solar system. Yeah. What was done at the Capitol on January 6th amounts to million some odd dollars or whatever it was, right? If you look at what was done during the BLM protests around the country, I think it totals estimates over $2 billion. Entire cities engulfed in flames. People were actually murdered.
Yes.
When you look at January 6th, Ashley Babbitt was murdered. Mm-hmm. There was no United States Capitol police officers that were murdered that day. Mm-mm. But during the protests for BLM, there was many police officers that were injured, that were murdered. They all got free passes. And then that lady that just ran for president, she was one of the ones that was saying, what was the name of that fund? There was some fund, right? The Minnesota Freedom Fund, I think it was.
Yeah, like a bail fund.
Yeah, let's bail these guys out that are destroying cities, properties, burning down, local businesses, right? And causing so much damage. I mean, it happened right here in Grand Rapids. I remember watching on my phone as Grand Rapids, 20 minutes down the road, was on fire. Buildings were being destroyed. And police officers...
National Guard had brought in.
You bet.
National Guard wasn't even necessary in Detroit, but it was in Grand Rapids and Lansing.
Yep. And that goes back to James Craig. He was a little bit tougher on that situation, saying, you're not going to do this here. And that mentality, not to switch up topics too far here, but take that mentality of how he acted and then translate that into enforcing the gun laws, enforcing other crimes, and saying, we're not going to put up with that. You're not going to act like that here. And there's consequences if you do. You're going to get the result like what you saw between those two different cities during the BLM riots. So, point in case there with that whole component. But if you just look at how the people were treated, like how many of those people actually spent time in prison? Very few. How many of those people for a multi-year manhunt were from every angle looked at, aimed to be identified, put rewards out for people. And they, in a large way, just backed off and said, well, let bygones be bygones, and just a slight little topic change here on the bygones to be bygones. I was doing an interview here recently, and I talked about how disgraceful it is that Biden gave the pardons to the J6 scam MIDI and to Fauci, and these other folks that he's handing out these blanket pardons to, his entire family, right? What does that tell you there? So there's no accountability that's going to come from any of that. Those people all just get a free pass. And this lady that was doing the interview says, Ryan, don't you think we should just, let that go and just let bygones be bygones? I'm like, that is probably the stupidest thing that I've heard in the last couple of years. All of that, that treatment to the American people that was manipulating them, that lied to them, we're just going to let that skate. We're just going to let that go. I said, no, absolutely not. Expose every single ounce of what they did. And then people like you can cover the truth. That's where people go for their news sources these days, is these podcasts like yourself and many others to get what the true stories are here. And that will influence future elections when we expose this corruption. And I think things go full circle. These people will be held accountable one way or another.
Absolutely. Back on the governor's race, we talked a little bit about some ballot initiatives that might make sense in 2026. Next month, Republicans are going to choose the Michigan GOP party chair. As a prospective candidate, as someone who's been a candidate, what does a candidate need from that next party chair?
Great question. I think that there's some good choices for party chair. I think maybe people know, some people may not know. Last time around, I put an endorsement out for Scott Greenlee based on the field that we had then. And Scott's running again. Michonne is also running, which, I think both of those two are capable to do the job that's needed for the Michigan GOP chair. And I don't know Joe really that well. I've watched some of his stuff here recently, and I'm kind of unsure of, where that's going to lead. And then, Senator Runstead also is running, which I think he's a great guy. And question, how does that work with him running the party and being a senator? But I know the question and topic of conversation is not diving into, who's the best there, who I think I would get behind. But what do we need from them? Whoever that party chair is, I think needs to focus on providing far and wide the message of why people should vote Republican, getting people out to vote in big, big numbers, and
get out the vote.
The vote, right? And get ballots in people's hands. I mean, it worked in 2024. We had a huge record turnout, and the Michigan went red by a lot. So we have a strong record of people that voted in the 2024 election, and we can replicate that again in 2026. So the party, obviously, in the primary needs to stay out of the primaries, and they need to focus on building up their resources so that in the general election, we can hit the ground running, get behind whoever that candidate is, and make sure we're doing everything we can to get out the vote and why people need to vote red up and down the ballot, so that we can see our state turn and go a different direction, so that we're not having another 4 years of tampons in boys' bathrooms and, birth control, and we're going to protect abortion rights. That's all that the Democrats have. Or giving money to the CCP, right? We're going to give money to China. And people don't want that in big numbers. And I think we have a huge opportunity here. And let me be optimistic. I feel that there's a certain vibe to the state right now, and there's a certain opportunity that a lot of people see that we're going to be able to capitalize on. And with the right gubernatorial candidate, I think we'll be very pleased with the results in 2026.
Yeah. Ryan, we'll get you out of here on this one. It's hard to believe it's only been a week of having Donald Trump in office. It feels like it's been so much more because of the speed of this administration. You could call it the Trump effect. You could call it Trump time. And I likened, watching the inaugural festivities, and then you live in Michigan where we're still messed up and we got a lame duck governor and she's doing a book tour rather than running the state. She's making this young adult version of her memoir that most eighth graders in Detroit can't even read.
Wow.
I see such a mess. But I think 2 years ahead, right? Like, as we're watching all of our friends have so much fun and then we come back home and it's messed up. But 2 years from now, we could be having a week and we could be having a month just like this. So let's project it. Let's say Ryan Kelley's governor. Let's say Republicans run the legislature. What might that first month of 2027, the new era of Michigan, look like?
Great question. People can jump over onto my X. The pinned post on there has Kelly's blueprint for Michigan, talking about how we're going to be investing in Michigan families. My handle on there is at Ryan D. Kelley, Kelley, numeric number 1. Pretty easy to find, right? If you just search my name, I'll pop right up. And that'll lay out a lot of the things that I believe are great ideas for our state, talking about the creation of the Michigan Department of Government Efficiency. Get some people in there that really want to start identifying those regulations that need to go, those bureaucratic agencies that need to go, that spending that in our budget is just unnecessary, going to the wrong places, going to maybe even the right places in amounts that are too high. Start identifying a lot of those things to course correct our state from a budgetary aspect. Looking at energy costs, opening up these different power plants that have been shut down because of green energy. Fire those babies back up and start getting nuclear power plants created across the state of Michigan so that we can close these older plants, but on a 1-to-1 megawatt exchange for these nuclear power plants, because that is clean energy that is abundant and it is inexpensive to create. And that needs to be the future for the state of Michigan, is nuclear energy, right? We need to increase our natural gas production. We need to end all of the lawsuits against Line 5 so we can start getting more of that, energy flowing to lower the cost of Michigan families heating their homes, the gas that they buy. Looking at cutting different regulations for the corporate income tax. I have a plan laid out there. Reduce the corporate income tax. Stop giving out corporate welfare and make it so that there's less taxes. Attract business to our state. Create those jobs. I'm a big advocate for getting rid of the personal resident property taxes. So many other things that are on that list there that I think in a very short period of time, that if we have the right gubernatorial candidate, helps to create a trifecta, we can hit the ground running just like Donald Trump on day number 1 and make some huge changes for our state that'll course correct us, not only for those next 8 years, for whoever that governor is, but for generations beyond.
Ryan, is there anything else you'd have people know about yourself, where to learn more about you?
They can jump over onto the Twitter or X to find and follow a lot of the information that I share. There'll be more information coming on my website as time goes on. And, I suppose people can just, pray for discernment from God to guide me in the direction that he wants me to go. As I navigate this, figure out what's, the best path forward, and have conversations like these. I'm open to feedback. I think that winning for our state is more important than winning for any individual, including myself, right? It can't be about me. It has to be about something much bigger than, the small egotistical focus on any one of us, right? So, people can, share some prayers from that aspect, that God can, help guide me in that direction and guide the state in that direction ultimately, right?
Right.
And hopefully
order our steps.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really what I'm looking for. I know time is limited, the election is not to the end of next year, but there's a lot of things that need to happen. So, we'll see where things go. And, I'll look forward to joining you on your show, whether it's if I announce my candidacy or for, talking about other things. I really appreciate what you're doing. You are the media in Michigan. You are where people look to for accurate and truth, whether it's news or, what's happening. So you keep up the good work, man. We got your back.
Thank you, Ryan. Be blessed.
Thank you. You too.